world where the virus didn't just kill, it changed everything forever. It was a quiet morning in the small town of Harlow, England. The year was 2053, exactly 28 years after the rage virus first spread across the country. Back then, in 2025, scientists in a lab had been working on a new kind of medicine to help with anger problems. But something went wrong. The virus got out and it made people turn into fast, angry monsters. They called them the infected. They ran at you, bit you, and spread the virus. Cities fell, governments collapsed, and survivors hid in small groups. Now, in Harlow, a man named Tom lived in an old house on the edge of town. Tom was 45 years old. He had short brown hair and wore old jeans and a jacket. He woke up early every day to check his traps for food. Rabbits and birds mostly. The world was empty now. No cars on the roads, no lights in the windows. Just grass growing through cracks in the pavement and birds singing in the trees. Tom had a wife named Sarah and a son named Jack. Sarah was 42 with long hair tied back, and she took care of the garden. They grew potatoes, carrots, and some beans. Jack was 15, tall for his age, and he helped with fixing things around the house. They had been living like this for years, staying away from the big cities where the infected still roamed. One day, Tom went out to check the perimeter. He walked slowly along the fence they had built from old wood and wire. The fence was about 6 feet high, with sharp bits on top to keep things out. As he walked, he thought about the old days. Before the virus, he worked in a factory making car parts. Now that seemed like a dream. Suddenly he heard a noise. A rustling in the bushes. Tom stopped and picked up his stick, a long piece of wood with a nail at the end. He moved closer, step by step. The bushes shook again. Then out came a rabbit. Just a rabbit. Tom let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He caught the rabbit in his trap later that day. Back at home, Sarah was making soup from vegetables. She stirred the pot over a small fire. Jack sat nearby, reading an old book about history. "Dad's back," Jack said when Tom walked in. They ate dinner together, talking about the weather. It was cloudy, might rain soon. That night, as they slept, something changed. Far away, in the ruins of London, the infected were not the same anymore. The virus had evolved. Some infected could think a little, move quieter, and some survivors, like hidden groups, had mutations from the virus, not full infected but stronger with better senses. But in Harlow, Tom and his family didn't know this yet. The next morning, Tom found a footprint outside the fence. It looked human, but the toes were wrong, longer, like claws. He stared at it for a long time, wondering. Tom stood by the fence, staring at the strange footprint in the dirt. The toes were too long, almost claw-like, and the edges were deep, like something heavy pressed into the ground. He crouched down, his knees creaking from years of hard work. The morning air was chilly, and his breath made little clouds. He wore the same old jacket, patched at the elbows, and his boots were caked with mud from yesterday's walk. The footprint bothered him, but he didn't say anything to Sarah or Jack yet. No need to worry them over nothing. He walked back to the house, carrying a bucket of water from the stream nearby. The stream was small, barely a trickle, but it was clean enough for boiling. Tom set the bucket on the porch and went inside. The house smelled of damp wood and the leftover soup from last night. Sarah was at the table, sorting seeds for planting. She had a pile of potato eyes and some bean seeds, all spread out on a piece of cloth. "Morning," she said, not looking up. Her hands were rough from years of digging in the soil. "Morning," Tom replied. He sat down and took off his boots, placing them by the door. The floorboards creaked under his weight. Jack was still asleep upstairs, probably dreaming about the stories in his history book. Tom didn't wake him. The boy worked hard enough, fixing leaks in the roof or patching holes in the walls. Let him rest. Tom ate a small breakfast, a piece of bread made from ground wheat they'd traded for last month. It was stale, but fine with water. He chewed slowly, thinking about the footprint. Maybe it was just a deformed foot, someone passing through. Survivors wandered sometimes, looking for food or shelter, but the claw-like toes stuck in his mind. After breakfast, Tom went to check the traps again. He walked the same path he always did, past the old oak tree with its gnarled roots, past the rusted car half buried in weeds. The traps were empty today, except for one with a dead mouse. Not worth eating. He reset the trap, using a bit of old cheese as bait. The cheese was moldy, but animals didn't care. Back at the house, Sarah was now in the garden, pulling weeds. She wore a faded blue dress and a scarf to keep her hair back. The garden was small, just a patch of dirt surrounded by stones. Potatoes were coming up nicely, but the beans looked weak. "Need more water," Sarah muttered, wiping sweat from her forehead. Tom nodded and went to fetch another bucket from the stream. That afternoon, Jack finally woke up. He came downstairs, rubbing his eyes. "Dad, you checked the fence?" he asked. Tom nodded, not mentioning the footprint. "All good," he lied. Jack didn't push. He grabbed a broom and started sweeping the porch, a job he hated but did every day. The broom was old, with half the bristles gone, but it still worked. As the sun set, Tom went back to the fence. He walked the whole perimeter, checking every post. Everything looked normal except for one thing. Another footprint, same as before near the first one. This time it was fresher, like it was made last night. Tom's heart beat a little faster. He looked out into the woods beyond the fence. Nothing moved, just trees and shadows. That night they ate potato soup again. Sarah added some wild herbs she'd found, but it still tasted bland. They sat around the table, the only sound the clink of spoons against bowls. Jack talked about a chapter in his book, something about old wars. Tom listened but kept thinking about the footprints. He didn't sleep well that night. Tom woke up before dawn, the air in the bedroom thick with the musty smell of old blankets and wood smoke from last night's fire. He could feel the rough texture of the sheets against his skin, worn thin from years of washing in the stream. His eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the cracked window pane, where frost had formed tiny crystals overnight. The cold bit at his nose and ears as he sat up, his joints aching from the dampness that always seeped into the house during autumn. He swung his feet to the floor, the wooden boards cool and splintery under his bare soles. The faint creak of the bed frame echoed in the quiet room. Sarah stirred beside him, her breathing soft and even, like a gentle rustle of leaves. Tom didn't wake her. Instead, he pulled on his socks, thick wool ones, itchy but warm, and slipped into his boots, the leather stiff and crusted with dried mud that flaked off as he laced them up. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of earth and herbs. Sarah had left a pot of water on the stove, and Tom lit a match, the sulfur sting sharp in his nostrils as the flame caught the kindling. The fire crackled softly, popping like distant fireworks, and soon the water began to bubble with a low hum. He poured it over some dried mint leaves for tea, the steam rising hot and fragrant, carrying a faint, bitter edge that cleared his head. Outside, the morning fog hung low, dampening everything with a chill that soaked through his jacket. The grass squished under his boots, wet with dew, and the air tasted clean but heavy, like rain was coming. Birds chirped sporadically, their calls piercing the silence, high-pitched tweets from sparrows in the trees. Tom walked to the fence again, his breath visible in puffs. The footprints were still there, now blurred a bit by the night's moisture, but the claw-like impression sent a shiver up his spine, colder than the air. He knelt down, the dirt soft and gritty under his knees, and touched the edge of one print. It felt uneven, like something sharp had dug in. A faint, unfamiliar scent lingered, musky, almost rotten, like spoiled meat mixed with wet fur. Tom's heart thumped steadily, not racing, but enough to make him aware of the blood rushing in his ears. He scanned the woods. Leaves rustled faintly in the breeze, branches scraping together with a scratchy whisper. No other sounds, no movement. Just the endless gray of trunks and underbrush. Back inside, Sarah was up, frying slices of potato in a pan over the fire. The sizzle filled the air, and the oily aroma made Tom's stomach growl. "Smells good," he said, his voice gravelly from sleep. She smiled faintly, but her eyes looked tired, shadowed in the flickering firelight. Jack came down soon after, his footsteps thumping on the stairs. He yawned, stretching his arms, and the joints popped like cracking twigs. They ate in silence mostly, the potatoes hot and starchy on the tongue, with a pinch of salt that stung slightly. The tea cooled in their mugs, its warmth seeping through the cracked ceramic into their palms. After, Tom went to repair a loose board on the shed. The hammer's thud echoed dully, wood splintering a bit with each nail driven in. Splinters pricked his fingers, drawing tiny beads of blood that tasted metallic when he licked them. That evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that felt cool on his skin, Tom heard it, a low growl from the woods, like a dog's rumble but deeper, vibrating in his chest. He froze, the hair on his arm standing up in the chill. It stopped, leaving only the wind sighing through the leaves. He told himself it was nothing, just an animal. but the musky scent returned on the breeze, stronger now. The morning air was sharp, slicing through Tom's lungs like a cold blade as he stepped outside. The grass was slick with dew, soaking the cuffs of his jeans, which clung damply to his ankles. His boots sank slightly into the muddy ground, each step making a soft squelch that echoed in the stillness. The sky was a heavy gray, clouds low and thick, carrying the sour tang of coming rain. Somewhere nearby, a crow cawed, its harsh cry cutting through the muffled hum of the waking world. Tom carried a bucket to the stream again, the handle creaking under his grip, cold metal biting his palm. The water gurgled over smooth stones, its icy touch numbing his fingers as he filled the bucket. He paused, catching a faint whiff of that musky, rotten smell again, like something dead left too long in the damp. It drifted on the breeze, there and gone, leaving his skin prickling under his jacket. He scanned the tree line where the woods loomed dark and tangled, branches swaying like skeletal fingers in the wind. Nothing moved, but the hairs on his neck stood up anyway. Back at the house, the kitchen was warm, heavy with the earthy scent of boiling potatoes and the faint smokiness of the fire. Sarah stood at the stove, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon, its handle worn smooth from years of use. Her apron was stained with dirt and grease, and her knuckles were red from the cold water she'd washed dishes in earlier. The plates clinked softly as she stacked them, a dull, repetitive sound that blended with the crackle of burning logs. "You're quiet today," she said, her voice low, almost lost in the hiss of steam. "Just thinking," Tom muttered, sipping tea that tasted faintly of rust from their old kettle. The mug was warm, almost too hot, searing his fingertips through a small crack in the handle. He didn't mention the growl he'd heard last night or the smell that wouldn't leave his mind. No point worrying her yet. Jack was outside, chopping wood. The axe's thwack against the logs rang out, each hit sending a sharp vibration through the air. Splinters flew, catching in his sweater, and the air smelled of sap and dust. His breath puffed out in clouds, and his cheeks were flushed from the effort. Tom watched him through the window, the glass streaked with grime that blurred the edges of the world outside. After lunch, more potatoes, soft and mealy with a sprinkle of bitter herbs. Tom decided to check the woods. The growl had stuck with him, gnawing at his thoughts like a splinter under a nail. He grabbed his stick, the nail at the end glinting dully, and headed toward the fence. The wood felt rough in his hands, splinters catching on his calluses. He stepped over the boundary, his boots crunching on fallen leaves that smelled of decay, sweet and sour at once. The woods were quiet, too quiet. No birds now, just the faint rustle of leaves overhead, like whispers he couldn't quite hear. The air was colder here, heavy with the scent of moss and something else, that musky rot again, stronger now, clinging to his throat. He walked slowly, eyes darting between shadows. The trees were gnarled, bark peeling like old skin, and the ground was uneven, roots tripping him as he went. Then he saw it, a scrap of cloth caught on a branch, torn and stained with something dark, maybe blood, maybe mud. It fluttered in the breeze, soft as a sigh. Tom's heart thudded, a slow, heavy beat that echoed in his ears. He reached out, the fabric coarse and damp against his fingers, and tucked it into his pocket. The smell was worse here, thick and choking, like a dead animal left to rot. He backed away, his boots snapping a twig that cracked like a gunshot in the silence. Back home, he didn't tell Sarah or Jack about the cloth. They ate dinner, bean stew, thick and bland, sticking to the roof of his mouth. The fire popped, casting flickering shadows on the walls, and the wind outside howled, rattling the windows. Tom lay awake that night, the cloth hidden under his pillow, its faint stench lingering in his nose. The morning was gray, the air thick with a damp chill that settled into Tom's bones as he stepped onto the porch. His boots scraped against the weathered wood, gritty with dirt tracked in from days of walking. The sky smelled of rain, a heavy metallic tang that clung to his throat. He pulled his jacket tighter, the canvas rough against his neck, its frayed cuffs damp from yesterday's walk. A faint breeze carried the scent of wet earth and pine, but underneath it, that musky rot lingered, faint but persistent, like a memory he couldn't shake. Tom grabbed the broom, its bristles worn to stubs, and swept the porch. The scratchy drag of the broom against the wood was rhythmic, almost soothing, but his eyes kept darting to the woods beyond the fence. The trees stood silent, their leaves rustling softly, like a whisper too low to catch. He finished sweeping, the pile of dust and leaves smelling faintly of mold, and went to check the traps. The grass crunched underfoot, frosted from the night's cold, each step sending a faint shiver up his legs. The traps were empty again, except for one with a small bird, its feathers dull and matted. Tom snapped its neck quickly, the tiny bones cracking sharply in the quiet. The bird's warmth faded fast in his hands, its feathers soft but sticky with dew. He tucked it into his bag, the canvas rough against his knuckles, and headed back, pausing at the fence. The footprints were still there, now half filled with muddy water that reflected the gray sky like a dull mirror. Inside, Sarah was kneading dough, her hands dusted with flour that clung to her cracked knuckles. The kitchen smelled of yeast and smoke, the fire spitting as a log shifted. The dough made a soft thud as she worked it, her breath puffing out in time with each push. "Traps any good?" she asked, her voice flat, tired. Tom nodded, setting the bird on the counter. Its faint, gamey smell mixed with the floury air. "Just one," he said, not mentioning the footprints or the cloth still hidden under his pillow. Jack was in the shed, sorting nails into rusty cans. The clink of metal against metal rang out, sharp and uneven, as he worked. His fingers were smudged with rust, and the air in the shed was heavy with the oily scent of old tools. "Need more wood soon," Jack said, his voice muffled by the scarf around his neck, damp from his breath. Tom grunted, his mind elsewhere. After lunch, bread and boiled bird, the meat stringy and tasteless, sticking to his teeth, Tom decided to check the woods again. The cloth from yesterday weighed on him, its coarse texture and faint blood-like stain nagging at his thoughts. He grabbed his stick, the nails cold metal catching the dim light, and crossed the fence. The woods were darker today, the air thick with the smell of rotting leaves, damp and sour. Each step crunched, the ground soft and spongy under his boots, like walking on something alive. He didn't go far, just far enough to see the tree where he'd found the cloth. Then he stopped. In the dirt, near a gnarled root, was a mark, a long, jagged scratch like something sharp had clawed the ground. It was deep, the soil dark and wet beneath, and it smelled wrong, like the musky rot but sharper, almost chemical. Tom's breath caught, his chest tight, the air tasting bitter on his tongue. He crouched, the damp earth soaking his knees, and traced the mark with his finger. It was cold, rough, and uneven like a wound in the ground. He heard a rustle, faint, like a leaf falling, but heavier. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the shadows. Nothing. Just trees, their bark peeling like blistered skin, and the wind sighing through branches. The smell was stronger now, choking, and his heart thudded, a dull pulse in his ears. He backed away, the stick heavy in his hands, and hurried home. That night, they ate in silence, the stew watery and bland, the fire's heat barely reaching Tom's chilled hands. The mark stayed in his mind, sharp and wrong, like a warning he didn't understand. The morning began heavy, the air thick with a damp fog that clung to Tom's skin like a cold sweat. His boots sank into the muddy yard, each step a wet squelch that smelled of earth and decay. The frost had melted, leaving the grass slick and glistening under a sky the color of old tin, its metallic scent sharp in his nose. He carried a shovel, its handle smooth and cool, worn from years of digging. The weight of it grounded him as he headed to the garden to check the potatoes. But his mind was on the claw mark from yesterday, its jagged shape burned into his thoughts. Sarah was already outside, her breath puffing in clouds as she pulled weeds. Her hands were red, chapped from the cold, and the dirt under her nails gave off a faint loamy smell. The weeds snapped softly as she tugged, their roots popping free with a muted crunch. "Potatoes look thin," she said, her voice low, almost swallowed by the fog. Tom nodded, scraping the shovel against the soil, the blade's dull scrape echoing in the quiet. The earth was soft, almost too soft, like it had been disturbed. Inside, the house smelled of damp wood and the faint sour tang of last night's stew. Jack was at the table, sharpening a knife with a whetstone, the rhythmic rasp filling the room. The blade glinted dully, and the air carried a metallic whiff from the steel. "Fence needs checking," Jack said, not looking up. His scarf was still around his neck, damp from the morning's chill, and his fingers were smudged with grime. Tom grunted, his throat dry, the taste of yesterday's tea lingering, bitter and stale. After a breakfast of watery porridge, gritty, sticking to his gums, Tom decided to walk the fence one last time. The claw mark had left him uneasy, and the musky rot smell haunted him, thicker now, like it was seeping from the woods. He grabbed his stick, the nail's cold edge brushing his palm, and stepped past the fence. The woods were silent, the air heavy with the scent of wet bark and rotting leaves, a sour sweetness that coated his tongue. Each step crunched, twigs snapping underfoot like brittle bones, and the fog made the trees loom like ghosts, their outlines blurred and gray. He didn't go far, just to the spot with the claw mark. It was still there, deeper now, as if something had scratched again in the night. But nearby, in the soft dirt, was something new. A small pile of bones, picked clean, their surfaces slick with dew and faintly yellowed. They smelled of decay, sharp and rancid, and Tom's stomach twisted, a sour taste rising in his throat. The bones were small, maybe a rabbit or a fox, but the way they were arranged, neat and deliberate, felt wrong. His heart thudded, a slow, heavy beat, and his breath rasped in his ears, loud against the wood's silence. He looked up, scanning the trees. The fog shifted, and for a moment he thought he saw something. A shadow, taller than a man, moving fast between the trunks. It was gone before he could blink, leaving only the rustle of leaves, faint and fading, like a whispered laugh. The musky smell surged, choking, and Tom's skin prickled, cold sweat beading on his forehead. He gripped the stick tighter, the wood biting into his palm, and backed away, his boots slipping on the damp ground. Back home, he didn't tell Sarah or Jack about the bones or the shadow. They ate dinner, potatoes again, soft and tasteless, the fire's heat barely warming his hands. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the fog pressed against the glass, thick and gray. Tom sat by the fire, the crackle of logs blending with the pulse in his ears. The bones, the shadow, the smell, they were warnings he knew. Something was out there, closer now, watching. But the night was quiet, and the house creaked softly as if holding its breath.